Hello, my name is Ricardo. Welcome to Taste Porto Bites Insights Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Gail Aguiar. How do you feel?
I feel good. It's
Yeah.
summer. Yeah.
It's a nice day.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
relaxed,
Yes.
right? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how come you came over to Portugal?
So I do this birthday trip on every year to go to a new country. And the only criteria is I have never stepped foot in the country before. So Portugal was my country in 2011.
Okay.
Yeah. Little did I know there was a lot of political upheaval, economic upheaval. I just kind of I landed in Lisbon having no idea about what was going on. And I sort of got a crash course in the economy.
Very intensive one. Right?
Yes. Yes.
But I was making you this question about moving over to Portugal because I had the expectation this would last us the whole episode because you have a kind of a record in moving from country to country, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't country shopping in 2011. That was like just the birthday trip. But I met my now husband on that trip, and I had no way to predict I would move here, like 2+ years later.
So it's a love story that brings you over to Portugal?
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. I mean, he was my third host. I had all kinds of, I don't know, expectations that it would be a little bit more like Spain, but every day I realized how not like Spain Portugal is. So
Thank you for that.
that was a discovery I made on my own, but my husband was very impressed
Oh, really?
with the fact that I was comparing, right? Because no Portuguese wants to be compared to a Spanish society. But I think naturally that's kind of what we do, just for geography. But when you learn about the things that make it different, then it's a learning lesson.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what it ended up being.
It's interesting that a lot of people from the north of the country, especially the northwest of Portugal, they feel this kind of connection with the Galicians. But if you tell them, oh, but would you be Spanish in any case? No, Galician. The Galician I would. And they feel quite proud about it. What was the main reason or motivation behind your selection of Portugal as a place to come to? Is that relationship?
The birthday trip was just like the introduction. But, I learned more about my husband because we ended up speaking on the phone after I left. And we just kept speaking on the phone, and then it just kept there's like this free plan after 9 p.m. So he took advantage of that and burned all the minutes. So you just end up talking, and like the good old days, before the internet, when people learn about each other by writing letters. I guess the new version was we did it by phone.
Okay.
And then I came over. I mean, to make a very long story short, there was a lot of paperwork, but we got married. And I chose to live in Portugal not because I didn't like Canada, not because I didn't like Toronto, but I was ready for something more challenging and different.
Mm-hmm. Was there a lot of research prior to your moving here that you did?
There's a certain amount of research that we had to do to get married. And that was like 5.5 months of just getting a birth certificate. So just to give you an idea, it wasn't that easy. But everyone thought that he would move to Canada. And so everybody, when I came here, was like, why are you here?
Especially back then. This is 2011.
Right? Well, I moved in 2013. So in 2013, people were like, why are you coming here? So answering that question over and over again, I really had to be sure of myself. Like, why am I here? So the question of why am I here has always been every place I moved, even within Canada, I always asked myself, why am I here? So I guess you could say I always needed a vision to execute.
And just to put in context, 2013 is for Portuguese people still a year with somewhat of a bad taste, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it was every news on television, and I was reading the television because, the journalistas that, everything's written and they speak, they enunciate. So I'm watching TV and it was all bad news, pretty much. Like
That sums up,
it
yeah,
was
that
pretty
decade
pretty
almost.
much bad news all the time. So there was a collective depression, but amidst all that, I had a lot of positive things to say. And a lot of that comes from tourism.
Hmm. You started working with tourism when you arrived here?
I arrived here. I'm a professional photographer, but I'm cringing saying that because I haven't touched my cameras for a long time. But I was photographing everything, really everything, because people didn't really know anything about Portugal. So people would come to my blog, which is 22 years old at the end of this month. There were people reading since day one,
Congratulations then.
like 22. I mean, like the grandmother of blogging, right? But it was mostly photos, so people came for the photos and then they just hung around for the words.
Yeah, because how does one prepare to come over here almost a decade ago? There isn't, or there wasn't a lot of information back then, was it?
Really nothing. I mean, even the Toronto Star interviewed me in 2016, and they never interviewed me when I lived in Toronto. I mean, they didn't care about me. Then suddenly they became interested in me because I was living in Portugal.
Mhm.
So the photos,
The photos
basically.
were what brought people
Yeah,
over.
yeah. People came, saw the photos, and they were like, "Oh, where's this? Where's this? Where's this?" So I really had to have a really good catalog for all of these photos.
And during that move, there were a lot of challenges, I would assume. What was one of the main challenges you faced moving over?
I knew I wanted to do something. Knowing what I knew about the economy, I knew I wanted to, employ people because a lot of young people were leaving, but I had no idea what I was going to do. I churned through a lot of ideas during that time, but all roads led to, something related to hospitality and tourism because tourism is, I mean, it's largely unregulated. It's the kind of thing where you can just like go for it and there's not really anyone stopping you from doing that. So if you have that kind of motivation, tourism seemed to me like the best way to showcase the country.
Hmm.
So I really focused on that. The blogging, the writing, the publicity. I mean, I've written for Lonely Planet. I'm in the 2022 edition
Hmm.
of Lonely Planet. So I take that as a lot of responsibility because I have in-laws, right? I mean, they're reading that stuff. Everything that I write, they read it.
Where is your husband from over here in Portugal?
His parents, his father was in Angola, was part of the evacuation,
Uh-huh.
went back to his home village, married my mother-in-law. So they're from the same village,
Okay.
Panela de Beira in Viseu.
But now the Vita in
Yes,
Viseu?
yeah,
Okay, that's a very central
it
location of the
is. It
country. Some
is. And
say
it's a
even
little
the
isolated too.
extremely. Yeah.
So you feel the isolation in that you can't just like skip over to a big city really fast. It's really the traditions are there. So I went to the village a lot, traveled a lot. I spent the first 5 years in Portugal really just like going around and photographing everything.
And you have a lot of pictures to
There's
take,
like
especially in that
uh,
region.
tens of thousands of photos of the whole country. So in a way, being a foreigner makes it easier. I don't have any baggage. Most Portuguese go to grandma's house, and they go back and forth between the home villages, whereas I'm very neutral. I mean, I'll go anywhere.
Was there a lot of things that surprised you in that incursion through the inner parts of Portugal back then?
It's still the villages are still very much the same, like, it is Patóis de Junho. I mean,
Pitões das
yeah,
Junhas.
these are very, I mean, they still have
Isolated, right?
cows just walking through the village. It doesn't I don't know what it looked like 100 years ago, but I don't think it would be that
That
different.
different. We
Maybe more
still
people.
we have I wouldn't say a saying, but we have this go-to catchphrase that we say every 10 kilometers you move further in from the coastal territory of Portugal. It's almost as if you go 10 years back in time.
Oh, completely,
Coming
completely.
over to Portugal, you felt that you tried to
Yeah,
describe that in
yeah,
pictures.
yeah. I mean, I'm trying to be, incognito, but not really incognito, but I'm photographing everything, like cows just coming down from the pasture by themselves. And this is in Madeira, Porto Santo. I mean, the Azores. I got married in Villafranca de Campo in San
San
Miguel.
Miguel, right?
Yep, yep. That big cliff diving
Yeah.
with a volcanic crater in the cliff. Yeah, that's where I got married.
Out of curiosity, you've been to every part of Portugal, you would say?
I've been to
Every.
five of the five Azorian islands, so not all. Like I haven't been to Pico and I've been to Grassa,
But other than that, you visited
Terceira.
all parts of continental and insular Portugal, you would say?
Yeah, every corner. I haven't spent a ton of time in every place, but I've photographed really most of the
So you're
country.
missing 4 islands, that's what you say? In about 10 years, you were able to
Eh,
go to all the different districts of
Yes,
the
I've gone
country.
to every capital of every district, all 18 on the mainland, plus most of the islands. Yeah.
It's curious because that you propose yourself to do, it's something that a lot of Portuguese still today don't manage to do. Does this coming to Portugal and this experiencing life here changed you personally in any way?
I would say so because you have to completely slow down and pay attention. I mean, I'm more of a kind of in the field person. I like to observe what's going on. I don't want to like change anything. I mean, that's the classic thing that people talk about now. Portugal's changing. Portugal's changing no matter who comes here. It's going to change because the young people grow up and they don't keep the traditions of their parents and the grandparents. Portugal is constantly changing. But the idea is not to come in and like steamroller everything. I mean, some people are literally just tearing down buildings and then building over them.
You saw this huge change in the country and the majority of the cities, this development of uh, construction and also a kind of cosmetic work being done in most Lithuanian cities, right? You've
Yes,
witnessed it firsthand.
but a lot of the interior is still the economic prosperity is not distributed evenly by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I was in, was it a couple years ago? I was at this spa and I mean, the whole town was still boarded up and just pockets of renovation, but most of the town was pretty derelict.
But there's a boom, an exponential boom in that renovating of the cities, and tourism has been one of the main responsible agents for that change, which a lot of people will say, oh, that brings a lot of bad things. But also the fact is that it brought a lot of good things, especially better conditions, safety, even things as simple as sanitation, public water, access, etc. Trying to understand this all, and because you work mostly with images still today, I would assume it's a professional, how do you say, a fault, or
It's
it's
a tick.
impossible. Yeah, it's a tick.
It's a tick I'm photographing, but not to the extent that I was before, but I've photographed I feel like I created a catalog of Portugal during the crisis that I think is important, that because I still revisit these old photos when I look at the city and I go, "Oh, what was there before? How did it look before?" I have to go back to the images because I can't remember. So it's
But
like an external hard drive.
it's like a great
It's a
evidence
record.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a record for sure.
Did you take any steps right out of the get-go to learn the language?
Yeah, I went to a class and I realized what a terrible classroom learner I am. Really bad. Well, here's the thing. I mean, the government sponsored classes, you can be very demoralized in the class because most of the people in there already speak Portuguese. The thing is they learned it on their own and they're just there to get the certificate, which gets you the permanent residency and the citizenship.
Mhm.
So I actually have to explain to people like don't feel demoralized that you're in a class where you're supposed to learn Portuguese and everyone's just kind of phoning it in. There's a reason for that. But at the time, I was very demoralized because I really did feel like I was the only person who didn't speak Portuguese. But I learned why.
It, But it's hard. It's hard of a language, right?
Yeah, and also my husband and I are both pedantics who married each other. So
Okay.
so I mean, I call him a bit of a grammar Nazi, and he gets very offended, but it's
But he's
true.
coming from
But it's
Viseu,
true.
so it's a region that takes language very seriously also.
When my in-laws got married, this is my father-in-law was part of the big evacuation.
Mhm.
So there was tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people who were looking for
In
jobs,
context, you're
in
you're talking about
jobs.
the evacuation that followed the
Yeah, follow the
revolution of
revolution.
74. Yeah.
So he ended up getting a job at the Porto Santo airport. So my husband, he was only born in Penedono, but my mother-in-law just had him there because they're so connected to the village. So during that time, you can have on your cartel, you can put in your village if
Mhm.
there's no hospital. So they went to such great lengths to have him
Being from
in
there.
Penedono and putting that he was from the home village, but he's never lived there. He actually grew up in Porto Santo. Like
And Madeira. Okay.
his first few years of life were in Porto Santo. So even though he says he's from the village, he's never actually lived in the village. But they're so connected to the village that they go. There are houses there. They spend time there. They have orchards there for chestnuts and fruit.
But that's a very interesting story because in a way you're both dislocated, right? You're
Yeah, I mean,
moving from place to
his
place.
emotional connection is to the home village, a place he's never lived in. But it's so strong. I mean, the family cemetery is there. I know he wants to get buried there. I mean, it's so set out in stone how- where he wants to be, after he dies. But, you know, the families are getting further apart, right?
Mhm.
They're not the family in Lisbon doesn't really go to the home village. There's like Easter, you know, November 1, like
All Saints, yeah.
uh,
But it's
that's
interesting your
kind of
description of
it.
a Portuguese person. He knows where he wants to be
Yes,
once he dies. It's like
yes.
it's a very Portuguese thing. I can control anything, but this I will control, where I'll
Yeah, I
rest.
mean, the other thing too, I'm from a country of immigrants, right? Canada is all immigrants. So we're all from other places and we all have like this cultural mixture inside of us and we have a cultural identity crisis too
Hmm.
because we're from different places, parents are from different places, but we're not connected to those places always. So, it can be difficult to get there. So, for me, living in Portugal where people know exactly where they're going to be buried, I mean, like, and they go to the same places on the same days and they celebrate the same traditions. This is kind of the opposite of what I grew up with.
Hmm.
So I'm here to observe it.
Coming to Porto and adapting and adjusting to the city, were there any particular um, things that, in terms of adaptation, were hard on you? Like the way we talk in Porto, it's somewhat vulgar, you would say. We use a
Well,
lot
yours
of
is mild. I mean,
thank you.
Andres is really like, and I didn't realize how strong this accent was until we were in Germany visiting relatives of my husband who'd been there almost their entire lives, but they sound like they just got there from here.
Yeah,
Uh, it was a bit startling how strong the accent is when it's removed, put in
such a long
Germany,
time.
and then suddenly it's like, I mean, the whole house is like FC Porto, right? Flags and everything. But
Okay.
they're very
Adamant of their
yeah,
personality.
exactly. And they want people to know where they're from.
But it's probably a shocker the first time you're in I wouldn't say in a uptight or like class place where you need to behave in a certain way, and all of a sudden you see all these people cursing for no apparent reason and being really upset.
But most people learn the swear words first, where, I mean, I don't know if I should say this, but my mother-in-law swears like a sailor, really. She really does. I don't
It
think she'll
makes
be
sense.
insulted by that, but it's punctuation, I'm told. It's not swearing, it's punctuation.
You're making pauses to breathe. That's what
Yeah,
you're doing.
yeah, exactly. So she's but I just kind of ignore it. I'm trying to learn, uh, the word different vocabulary. I
Mhm.
didn't learn the swear words first. Most people do. I do everything backwards, is what I'm saying, Ricardo.
Well, you started by marrying in San Miguel when you met someone that's actually from Porto Santo that came with her family. It's very, very backwards, I would
Backwards.
say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything's totally backwards. I don't really follow
You really moved multiple times
yes.
in
So I
life.
lived in
So
the UK, Australia, and the US before moving to Portugal.
how has this change in particular changed you personally?
Well, the other countries are English speaking, and that was largely because of work. I mean, I didn't move for work, but I had to hurry up and find work. I mean, I moved and then I looked
Started
for a
working.
job. So having English speaking countries helps with that. Whereas in Portugal, I knew that I was not going to have another employer when I left Toronto. I mean, that was it. I already knew that. So if I wasn't going to be looking for work, I would have to set up my own work. So that's what I did. I went completely rogue and just took all the elements of all the places and all the work that I've done before and mashed them into new work. So that's what I did.
That you created for yourself for
Yeah. I mean, I moved here at 41, so not really spring chicken, but amassing knowledge on its own doesn't make sense. You have to use it, right? It's not just a collection.
Mhm.
So I figured, you know what? I could come up with my own work. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I was continuing the things that I enjoyed. And then I knew that I would eventually fall into what I really wanted to do.
Are there any funny or at least memorable anecdotes from your coming over to Portugal, especially in the first 2 3 years? Something is bound to have happened that is still memorable as a funny anecdotal moment with interactions with
Especially
Portuguese.
with the
No,
language. Oh my gosh. And we were in Santa Maria de Feira we were there early in the day for the medieval fair.
okay.
And we went to a cafe and I went in and I tried to order a coffee and the guy comes running out and asks if does anyone speak Estrangeiro? Anyone? Anyone? And
Estrangeiro.
I'm just like, okay. It's embarrassing. But my husband thought it was funny because obviously Estrangeiro is not a language.
Uh-huh. But it's foreign, so
Yes, it's anyone here speak foreign. I mean, lots of things, but the number one thing that I totally enjoy is that people can just get through a conversation and they don't ask me where I'm from. Very, very few times have people started off right out the gate and asked me where I'm from. I think it's funny that because I live near the airport, that lots of people stop, watch me walking my dog, and ask me for directions. Like I'm supposed to know where.
where you are.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't drive here, so I don't know anything. Like
You
I
don't
probably
drive here?
no, I've never driven in Portugal. No, I forgot to exchange my driver's license. I put it in a drawer, left it, and then realized, oh, I can't exchange it.
Maybe that's one of the greatest reasons why you really enjoy this city. You don't drive here.
Yeah, it's horrible to drive here.
It's a nightmare city to drive, right?
But it needs to be done on foot because it's dangerous to be driving and for me to be looking at things all the time. I mean, there's always a danger of falling over just walking. So I don't want to multiply that by driving. I don't want to hit anybody. But there's a lot of details
Mm-hmm.
and you would just miss so many things if you were in a car or I liked going on the bus. The bus is slow, but thing about being on the bus is I listen to all the old people
Talking.
talking, and they come on the bus and they usually talk about, they went to mass, they didn't see that person, and oh, my shoulder hurts, and my grandchild didn't visit me yesterday, and there's just a lot of
And it seems there is this competition between them about
oh yeah,
who
and
hurts the most,
and
right? Also.
the first person who sits down because they have a like a bum knee or something like that is yelling to the person at the back because no one can be bothered to get up and move. So they're having a full on shouting conversation, and everyone is just just there listening to the
But
whole thing.
going back to when you came over to Portugal, this when you really did the move, 2013, you felt a lot of people like my age nowadays,
Leaving.
38, 39, leaving the country, right?
Yeah.
You feel now, 10 years into time, that we are in an aged country?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But at the same time, I feel that elders are more respected here than in other countries. So, like I said, I take the bus because I enjoy listening to these conversations with elderly people. And I try and give up my seat for them, but they won't. I mean, they won't take it, right? So I have to pretend to get off at the next stop
But
so that they'll sit down.
do you think we respect elders or we fear them? Maybe that's it.
I think there's a lot of fear too. Because when I first got here, I remember there was a Portuguese girl complaining, and she's like, "Oh, I can't smoke because people are always telling me not to smoke, and I go to the beach, and they always tell me to put on more clothes." And and I'm like, "Well, they're watching out for her, basically."
Being that you're here for such a long time, and obviously I noticed that you have an interest in history also, right? There's part of the background of the country and some historical moments the country went through, and even coming to a city like Porto, that even though it's the second biggest city, it's it's huge and absurd almost the amount of history the city holds. Is there any particular historical moment that you see yourself always going back to in order to try and understand more and more and more about it? Because it's kind of like a Rosetta Stone of the understanding of the city itself and the country in a way.
I would say, the French invasions, like a couple hundred years ago. I mean, my office is right beside Rotonda de Boa Vista.
Hmm.
There's a giant. Uh,
Lion taking an eagle.
yes, so like I'm on the top floor, right? So I can see that lion and the eagle. So it's symbolic, right? The eagle being France, the lion being Portugal. Even though it looks like my dog taking a crap, that's what it looks like. And now you can't unsee it, right?
No,
But the symbolic presence of France, even in the people, all the people who went to France to live, we talk about it a lot, even with me and my team, about the things that people say when they moved to France, or they were born in France and grew up in France, and this group of immigrants are different than, say, for example, people contrasting the immigrants who went to Brazil or even Switzerland. But France is kind of present all the time, right? Even when people talk about Lisbon and the way that Lisbon is renovated according to the Marquis de Pombal, and then the French boulevards and the
hmm,
fountains and everything look very different than here, because people always think, "Oh, Lisbon looks very different than here." But then we also have like the Mosteiro in Gaia.
Pilar, yeah.
Yes, and then we also have different buildings, influences. The French are
It's everywhere. Yeah.
around. So even
And
though Nassani is Italian, but there's still other influences from France.
the fact that Spain is such a fear-mongering neighbor, I think, allowed the Portuguese to seek further than the
Go further.
Pyrenees and the peaks
Yes.
of Europe for influence. And you see that even in the way people act, and especially in gastronomy, when you say so.
Yes, and also, for example, I had a tour in the north in Minho, and
Mino?
I remember the tour guide saying, "Look at all the castles on the Portuguese side. Do you see any castles on the Spanish side? No, because we're not aggressive." And that kind of thing stuck with me for a long time, also because he was clearly like, he really made a point of, look at where the castles are. They're on one side. Little Portugal managed to defend itself against, all these invaders. And
I was curious that those fortifications up in the Minho River, they're all by Vauban, the French architect that made a lot of the fortifications in Portugal, and they were only conquered by the French. So it was maybe a way to get to the Portuguese territory as well.
the thing is, the whole country is a living museum.
Mhm.
Like you can't look anywhere without there being a story, underneath you.
Any particular story in Porto that still gets you obsessed and you feel like you have to tell everyone coming into the country that's new to here?
Yeah, I've been saying for 10 years that J.K. Rowling could not have been she could have not afforded to go to Livry Lello, and that whole intertwining of her history and the anyway, no, aside from that, something bit older than that, I mean, this is the kind of thing that I used to it's on my blog. I talked about there's no way that a woman with a baby would be writing books in this cafe. There's like not even a cafe
The
in it.
Majestic, oh,
Yeah,
the Lello
delivery
also, yeah,
Lello.
yeah.
Yes. So that was a thing that I thought it was amazing, but I never read any Harry Potter books. I didn't make the connection at all. And I try and get people to think, not tying things in with popular culture. Like I was hitchhiking New Zealand before Lord of the Rings. So I don't have, and I've never seen Lord of the Rings. So to me, New Zealand is the country, not the place where Peter Jackson shot Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
right? So I always like to separate the place and also the Harry Potter robes. I mean, that kind of thing just like
There is
bugs
some
me
presence,
so
some
much,
influence,
though.
but I think there was a almost taking advantage of the situation to promote certain aspects of the city that needed renovation. Lella Bookstore is now a great example of how tourism can create a history of success and almost an empire, and they are
Yeah,
in
they
their
are. They're
own way an
buying all
empire.
kinds of stuff. They bought the theater, the Teatro
A lot of
Sera
things, a
Bandeira.
lot of
Yeah.
things. But also, it's interesting that the city had to adapt and adjust to this overwhelming number of people coming here to visit and needing some type of entertainment. And at least these kinds of histories that are, like you say, more pop culture based, but they entertain people. They make the journey and traveling for tourism a little bit less serious, because if they were coming and
Yeah, it just sounds too dry. I mean, a lot of people talk about the Louis Bridge. So, I mean, I write Louis Bridge with the modern orthography,
Mhm,
but if you look at the bridge, it has a Z,
mhm,
right? So this naturally comes up a lot too, where I talk about the orthography
mhm.
and how some people never adopted it and like will never
Still now with the
adopt it.
Portuguese language treaty, the new orthographical treaty, that no, I will not take my C, my
Yes.
silent C will
And
stay there.
but even my own team is like they're in their 30s and they still write with the C's, right? So I mean, it's going to take a long time for this orthography to happen.
I always feel the Portuguese are a little bit like the tests in groups. You have to have a vast majority of people doing the same
Yes.
thing. If you don't have that, they won't adopt it. It's gonna be deny until the end, and once it's everybody's okay, we'll go. In going back to the food and the gastronomical influence, mostly of the French, is there any Portuguese recipe you've managed to master at home?
I make a pretty mean bacalhau brás.
Mm-hmm.
I make a vegan version and a vegetarian version. I feel like it's a gateway because bacalhau, I mean, if you smell it, you'd never eat it. Like if you just smelled it and judged everything. I
Put it
mean,
aside forever.
when it's hanging, I mean, one of the things that really bugged me was when, is it the actually not far from here, the bacalhau hanging from it was a traditional grocery,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's not.
Yes, the Casa de Borracha, if I'm not mistaken. It's just up the street right over here.
Yeah, and all of these, not many have real bacalhau hanging because I guess it's kind of offensive. But at the same time, it's okay. It's decorative. It's decorative in it's sardines on everything. But but I think if you want to introduce people to bacalhau, you have to go mild,
Mm-hmm.
and the mildest version is the bacalhau brás.
Brash.
Yeah. Bacalhau com natas is a little too heavy. I used to make it from scratch, and then I was, like, looking for shortcuts because it just takes a really long time if you do it the traditional way, but I think it's a little bit too much natas for people, but the brás is, like, you can lighten it up, you can add more cabbage, you can
And
You can do things.
cilantro or parsley, what do you use?
Well, I'm more of a cilantro, but my husband's more of a parsley. But it's the north. Like
Yeah.
if I want cilantro, I have to go to like Algarve, Alentejo before before it starts appearing on the menu.
The pace of life here is somewhat slow, right? Um, were there any techniques you had to master in order to adapt to our
The pace.
slow pace and particular way of doing things?
I think it depends. I mean, some things don't need to be done fast. I mean, I would say most things don't need to be done fast, but there's a particular communication style with email. I mean, if you deal with, I always tell people don't email, like you need to phone if you want to get anywhere. And you might have to phone a few times as well. And don't ever leave a voicemail because no one will listen to it.
Not here. Yeah.
So it's really just learning these things, learning that if you want to make a reservation, I mean, you could use the fork, you can use now there are more things, more technology used now than before.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, when also did some video work for a Canadian airline, and I only agreed to do it because I'm not really into video, because they let me choose the places I wanted to feature. But I had to get permits. I mean, that in itself is a chapter in a book. Just trying to get the permits and the permissions and the logistics of filming in different places. So
How is it trying to tackle bureaucracy in Portugal
well, you need a Portuguese friend is what you need. I
that
mean,
knows how to curse very well, right?
yeah, a local guy. I mean, I had a local guy. There was a cameraman and a director and an assistant. There were two cameramen. So the guy that I was filming with is the guy who made the series of movies with the word bullet in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a comedy. It's a Portuguese.
Balas e bolinhos.
Yes,
Yeah.
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 So it from him I learned the word descansa, desenrascansa, untangle. See, I can't.
Desenrascar.
Yeah, I can't
Okay.
even. Yeah, I can't
Yeah,
even
yeah, yeah.
untangle it in my own mouth. But he's the one who taught me this word because he helped me untangle the logistics for that day because it was a mess.
And when did you learn that word being here?
I did the work for Air Transat probably 2016. Yeah,
A while ago. Because
2016.
it's a very
I love this word, but I can't
it's a
say it.
summary of Portuguese behavior throughout history, right? It's
That's why it's my favorite word.
making do with what you have and
And I
adjusting and
think the
adapting.
Portuguese psyche revolves around this word. And you hear it coming into national football, like the football team too. Like, oh, it's a total unholy mess, and then somehow they come out at the last
Ah,
moment. They
desenrascar.
they didn't pull it out of the they didn't untangle it the most recent
No, they
episode.
didn't.
But I think they're known for, yeah, just kind of doing a big scramble and then usually getting it through. But
Yeah,
yeah, it was a lot of collective sadness the other day.
there
But
was.
but this word I think is so important to learn because it's not going to be a straight line like the Germans like. It's not going to be like we do this and we do this and we do this.
It's never linear, right?
No, it's like a lot of
Zigzagging.
yes.
If I was to make a small exercise with you, would you go for it? Just for
Okay.
now? Imagine that teleportation was invented. You're going to be moving to a different country. There's only one pastry from Portugal. You can teleport whenever you want to the place you've moved next. What would it be?
I have to say I'm a big fan of the Jesuita, but it has to be fresh. So the teleportation needs to be
Immediate.
yes, exactly. None of this slow pace
And
teleportation.
from the oven,
Yes,
right?
directly from the oven because I really think the butter is extremely important. Like you can't use vegetable whatever.
Margarine, yeah.
No, it needs to be butter. It needs to be warm, and you need to have the coffee with it. Yeah.
The Jesuit, that's a pastry from a very specific bakery up north. It
In
shares this
Santa Teresa, yeah.
sensitive.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes. So I go there, I go to the bakery, I eat it there, but I take some away, but the ones that I eat there are the best.
But also, it's the place, right? I think there's an aura stuck to the place where we experience things that all of a sudden it changes our taste buds and makes it all different in our palate, right? Are there
Yeah,
things from São Miguel or from Porto Santo that you kind of miss?
from visiting those, I have to say the Azores is totally different. Like the catch of the day in the Azores is gonna be different than the catch of the day in, like, Angeles, right?
Hmm.
Because it's totally different water. So it's the temperature that, like, there's so many things that are different. There are stews, fish stews that we had in San Miguel and Terceira and different places. I had this really good dessert in Terceira that I've never seen anywhere else. It was called Dos de Vinagre.
Just vinagre, yeah. I don't know of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Like, you'd have to go there and have it. And even within each town, there's certain restaurants that have their, caseira, and
O
you're never
doce da casa,
you're not
the
gonna
sweet
have
of
it
the
any
house.
yeah, you're
Yeah,
not gonna have it anywhere else.
right.
So you have to physically go. So that's like my number one thing. So instead of in North America, we're very up into the, oh, I had like this from there and this from there. It's an immigrant country, this from there. But you need to physically go to these places. It's never going to be the same. Everyone is going to say it's not the same because the ingredients are different. I learned that in Iceland. In Iceland, their lamb is totally different because the lamb is eating grass from volcanic rock. So of course it's going to taste different. And you're never going to replicate that skyr anywhere else. I've seen skyr in Portugal. I've seen skyr in the
But
United
it's not
States.
the same thing.
It's not the same thing at all. No.
Just wrapping up, and because the conversation went so light that time passed really very, very fast. Uh, do you have any plans or goals you're particularly thrilled about in the coming years?
You mean the stuff that I've put on the horizon for goals? I would just like to work less. That's a general goal. But I would need to go back to myself in the first 5 years where I was exploring with the camera. I need to get back to that place because I feel like I've veered completely into a work direction that I wasn't expecting. But I did fulfill the goal that I made when I first moved here, which was employ Portuguese people. So my whole team is Portuguese. So.
Gail, thank you so much for this. Before you go, it's just one small, I wouldn't even say this is a gift. This is more of an offering and kind of a token of friendship and a memory that I hope you take with you. It's a swallow.
Ah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Swallows are basically a symbol that talk about the necessity of going with the expectation of coming back. They represent spring, good weather coming, but also they represent a good memory of times that have passed. And this was a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I need to go to a shop, or not a shop. I need to make the rest of the family.
You for sure have to. You for sure have to. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
See you in our next episode, and thank you so much for watching.